Kanlaon Volcano erupts, and it gave 2 minutes of notice. Not to the scientists at the observatory, not to the emergency managers in Bacolod, to the families living on the slopes below the crater. 2 minutes between silence and the moment the sky above their rooftops turned the color of charcoal. At 4:38 in the afternoon on February 19th, 2026, the residents of Sitio Guintubdan in Barangay Ara-al, Carlota City, heard a sound they recognized immediately. They had heard it before, not once, not twice, 5 times in 20 months. The booming pressure wave from the summit of Kanlaon Volcano, traveling 30 kilometers across the populated valleys of Negros Island and rattling the walls of wooden houses in communities that have lived in the shadow of this mountain their entire lives. Within minutes of that sound, gray ash began falling from the sky onto roads, rooftops, rice fields, and the faces of children standing in the streets. The families of Sitio Guintubdan did not wait for an official evacuation order. They grabbed their belongings, loaded whatever they could carry into vehicles and bags, and left. 115 people from Barangay Ara-al alone were moved to the La Carlota South Elementary School, which had been converted into a temporary evacuation center before the eruption column had finished rising above the crater. They had practiced this. They knew the route, they knew the center, they knew which school building had been designated for their barangay. Because this is not the first time they have done this. It is the 5th. And the question that follows 60 families walking out of their homes with their belongings in plastic bags and cardboard boxes is not simply a logistical one. It is a question about how long a population can continue to absorb the weight of living next to a volcano that does not rest. The communities surrounding Kanlaon Volcano are not temporary settlements. They are generations-old farming communities built on some of the most fertile volcanic soil in the central Philippines. Sugarcane fields and rice paddles stretch across the lower slopes of the mountain. Local markets, schools, and churches anchor towns like La Carlota City, La Castellana, Bago City, and Kanlaon. Families have farmed the valleys below the crater for decades, relying on the volcanic soil that makes Negros Occidental one of the most productive agricultural regions in the country. For most of those families, the volcano was background, a mountain on the horizon, a feature of the landscape. Its last confirmed magmatic eruption before the current cycle was in 1902. 122 years of relative silence separated the lives those communities built from the reality they are living now. Then, on June 3rd, 2024, that silence ended. An eruption column rose 5,000 meters above the crater, and pyroclastic flows pushed 3 kilometers down the southern slopes toward the communities below. 57,000 people across the surrounding municipalities were affected. Nearly 4,000 were forced out of their homes. 2,680 houses were damaged or destroyed. The sugarcane fields and rice paddies of Negros Occidental were buried under a layer of gray volcanic ash that drifted as far as Bacolod City, 85 kilometers away. Agricultural losses reached $3 million in a region where farming is not a lifestyle choice, but a livelihood. Families who had never evacuated before loaded their children and elderly relatives into vehicles and drove away from homes their grandparents had built. And when the activity subsided enough for FIVIOLCS to declare it safe to return, they came back, because where else would they go? 6 months later, on December 9th, 2024, the volcano erupted again. This time, the eruption plume reached 4,000 meters. The shock wave was heard not just across Negros, but on the neighboring islands of Panay, Guimaras, and Cebu. 40,000 more people were affected across 10 municipalities and cities. Lorena Gamao, a resident who evacuated after the February 19th, 2026 eruption, described the December 2024 event with a single sentence. She said it was like a bomb, something that rattles you to the bone. She had evacuated in December 2024. She evacuated again in February 2026. The same woman, the same volcano, the same road out of town. For the families who live within the hazard radius of Kanlaon, The eruption cycle is not an abstract geological phenomenon. It is a recurrent disruption of daily life that is now repeated 5 times in 20 months. Classes canceled, farms left unattended, livestock abandoned. Ash coating the surfaces of every object left outside, from motorcycles to vegetable gardens to the corrugated metal roofs of the houses on the lower slopes. Residents who remained in their homes after the February 19th eruption reported breathing difficulties from the sulfurous fumes that reached street level in Bago City and the barangays of La Carlota. The city government of La Carlota distributed protective masks to affected residents as part of its immediate response. The clearing operation on ash-covered roads began before the eruption column had fully dissipated. The La Carlota City Emergency Operations Center declared a red alert and convened an emergency council meeting within hours of the event. Kanlaon City Mayor Jose Chubasco Cardenas suspended classes and urged residents to prepare their Joe bags and remain alert. La Castellana Mayor Añejo Nicor canceled classes across all levels. These are the institutional responses to an event that has become, through repetition, almost routine. But the weight of that routine is not evenly distributed. The 109 families who had already been living in designated evacuation centers since the 2024 eruption cycle, displaced from their homes within the 4-kilometer permanent danger zone and unable to return, were still there when the February 19th eruption occurred. They did not need to evacuate. They were already gone. Their displacement, which began months earlier, has simply continued. For them, the February 19th eruption was not an emergency departure from ordinary life. It was confirmation that ordinary life is no longer available to them on the slopes where their homes stand. The provincial water filtration truck deployed to supply safe drinking water to evacuees in La Carlota City is not a permanent infrastructure solution. It is a mobile response to a population that has been moved out of its fixed infrastructure by a volcanic system that shows no sign of completing its current eruptive cycle. The Office of Civil Defense Director for the Negros Island region, Donato Sermeno, said publicly that authorities had initially prepared for a possible alert level increase from 2 to 3 after Thursday's eruption. That increase did not come. The eruption lasted 2 minutes, and the subsequent monitoring data showed no dramatic escalation in seismic activity or ground deformation. Sermeno's statement to the press after the event was measured and precise. He said there have not been any succeeding events since Thursday's eruption, but that authorities cannot discount the occurrence of further activities. That is the operative phrase. Cannot discount. It is not reassurance. It is a risk assessment delivered in the language of institutional caution. It is what officials say to a population that has evacuated 5 times in 20 months and will almost certainly be asked to evacuate again. Perley Syanson, a science and research specialist at the Kanlaon Volcano Observatory, confirmed on Friday that monitoring parameters show no significant increase in activity following the eruption. Sulfur dioxide emissions remain low. Seismic data shows no dramatic escalation. She did not say the volcano is safe. She said the instruments are not showing what they showed before the alert level was raised to 3 in 2024. That distinction matters. Because the mechanism that produced the February 19th eruption, the same mechanism that has produced all 5 eruptions in this cycle, does not require elevated seismic activity or high sulfur dioxide output as its warning signal. It requires the opposite. A drop in emissions, a sealing of gas pathways, a short-term inflation of the edifice, and then 2 minutes. If you are following this coverage and want to stay ahead of the next event, subscribing to this channel is the fastest way to do that. A like also helps more people find this kind of analysis before the next eruption cycle begins. And if you have a question or a theory about where this cycle is heading, leave it in the comments below. A like also helps more people find this kind of analysis before the next eruption begins. And if you want to share what you think will happen next to these communities, leave it in the comments below. Now, back to the people on those slopes. The 60 families currently sheltering at the La Carlota South Elementary School are not the full measure of displacement that Kanlaon has produced since 2024. They are the most recent increment of a cumulative toll that has been building event by event since June of that year. 57,000 affected in the first eruption, 40,000 in the second, 28,000 displaced after the April 2025 event. At the December 2024 peak, the Office of Civil Defense estimated that 87,000 people needed to be evacuated, with nearly 47,000 of them coming from La Castellana alone. A tent city was established in Himamaylan to house displaced residents in the event of further escalation. A price freeze was imposed across Negros Occidental to prevent predatory pricing in the aftermath of the eruption. A liquor ban and a curfew were enforced in affected municipalities. A health advisory was issued as far away as Toledo in Cebu due to air pollution from the volcanic ash plume. 29 commercial flights were canceled at airports across the Philippines, from Manila to Bacolod to Cebu to Davao. These are not the consequences of a single catastrophic eruption. They are the accumulated consequences of a volcanic system in a sustained state of activity, delivering disruption to the same communities repeatedly across a period of time long enough that the disruption has begun to redefine what normal life looks like in the municipalities surrounding Kanlaon. The farmers whose sugarcane and rice crops were buried under ash in June 2024 replanted. Some of them lost a second harvest to the December eruption. Some of them lost fields again to the Lahar flows that swept down the river channels after heavy rains hit the ash-covered upper slopes in the months that followed. The bridge in La Castellana that was damaged by a Lahar in May 2024 had been there before Kanlaon began its current cycle. The agricultural land buried under volcanic sediment in the river valleys below the volcano will take years to fully recover productivity. The communities on Kanlaon's flanks are not just enduring a series of disruptive events. They are absorbing a slow and cumulative reshaping of their landscape, their livelihoods, and the basic conditions of their daily existence. As of this morning, the monitoring network at the Kanlaon Volcano Observatory is watching the same instruments that have tracked every previous eruption in this cycle. The tilt meters embedded in the flanks of the mountain. The GPS stations measuring millimeter-scale changes in the position of the ground surface. The sulfur dioxide sensors monitoring the gas output from the summit crater. The seismometers listening for the first tremors of the next pressurization cycle. And in the evacuation center at La Carlota South Elementary School, 60 families are waiting. Some of them voluntarily, some of them because they have no choice. All of them living with the same awareness that has defined life in the communities surrounding Kanlaon since June 2024. The awareness that the next 2-minute window could open at any time. That the sky above their rooftops could darken again before the next season's harvest is planted. That the volcano does not operate on a schedule that accommodates the lives built on its slopes. The deep magma source beneath Negros Island is still there. The mechanism is still running. The system is reloading. And the question for the families sheltering at the La Carlota South Elementary School is not a geological one. It is a simpler and harder question. How many times do you evacuate before you stop coming back? If you want to understand the geological mechanism driving these eruptions and what the monitoring instruments are specifically watching right now, that analysis is in the next video.